Very cool. So we have another question, and Francesca asks, how did you start? I mean, were you rejected by any agency?
Yes, I think there might be a writer out there who never got rejected, and if so, I probably don't like that person very much.
I don't think that person exists. I don't know. I doubt it, but
um, but I was rejected a lot. I don't know the exact number, but I know it was well over 50 times before an agent took me on for Halfway to the Grave. And I wasn't just rejected by agents. I was also, if a publisher accepted unagented submissions, I sent my query letter and sample chapters to them, and I was rejected by them. And it was funny because 2 weeks after HarperCollins bought my debut novel, I received a rejection from a smaller press publisher that said, essentially, wow, you're never going to sell this pile. And I replied back and said, well, thank you so much, but I already did. So that
yeah,
was a fun email to send.
that is a very fun email to send. Well, so clearly, and your wonderful editor Erica really believes in you, so that you know they just didn't know what they're talking about.
But you know
um,
what? I'll take it back to subjectivity. For that editor, the book was a pile. I mean,
yeah,
and that was she wasn't necessarily wrong in her opinion. That was her opinion. Erica, who took it on, really liked the book. She believed in it, and she got out in front of readers. And just like anything else, I had some readers just love the book. Some readers were like, it's okay, I'll give her another chance, and some readers who hated it. And as an author, all you can that's going to happen, and all you can hope is at the end of the day, the readers who really like your stuff outnumber the readers who really don't, and that's how you stay published.
that very good advice. um, so, speaking of kind of going back to the readers and the characters and their love of a lot of your characters, Lisa asks, "Will we ever meet Timothy? Where is he now?" Etc.
Oh, was that Timothy? You cut off for a second during the question.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. Will we ever meet Timothy?
Okay.
And where is he now?
Okay, Timothy, and this is called I should have been better organized when writing and made a name graph to see that I had two characters in my first book named Timothy. So my bad on that one, first of all. People said, did you do that deliberately? No, I'm unorganized. So the Timothy she's referring to, I assume, is the vampire Timothy who was changed back over 200 years ago, along with several other characters in the series, Bones, Spade, Ian, and he's kind of been off grid since then. And the last mention of him was a character said he went off in search of Cain, who was the origin of all vampires. And, basically we assume he's dead because we haven't heard from him in decades. As far as whether or not readers will ever see him, I don't know. I can tell readers this: he's not dead, and he has a good reason for not contacting his friends in decades. But I think it might take me an entire book to get into that reason, and I don't have a complete story for it in my head. So if I can present it to readers in a way that it's just a little side mention, I will, but I think it would be too much of that. So that's kind of a stay tuned and we'll see on that one too, because it might end up being its own story, or it might end up being just a footnote in another story, and I'm not sure yet.
Well, and speaking of vampires and Candace actually, and the origin of vampires, and vampire myth, Candace has asked or has said that you have such a fresh point of view on Dracula, and I love it. What made you think of this version of the Dark Prince?
Um, as far as how I thought of Vlad, it's funny, when I started writing about vampires, I swore to myself I would never write about Dracula because I thought it's been done so often, and I had felt I had nothing to bring to the table with it. And then in the middle of writing my third book, all of a sudden he popped into a scene I was writing, unplanned, uncalled for, and unwilling to leave, essentially. And he popped into my head almost just as quickly with his own personality. And one of the first things is he hated to be called Dracula, and he hated anything to do with that myth and lore. And I finished writing the scene and thought, oh, I'll just write it with him in it, and then I'll take him out afterward. And I found myself not taking him out afterward. And so once I realized he was going to stay, I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to keep him, I need to at least do research on the character to know more about him. And I started researching the historical character of Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler. And what I found was really interesting. There were two accounts of him, essentially. One was the account, we're more familiar with, which paints him as kind of a cruel, sadistic ruler who would impale people for fun. And the other painted him as a ruler who was comparable for his time period, who was very much a nationalist and loved his country and sacrificed a lot for his country in trying to keep, an invading empire out of it. At the time, the Ottoman Empire was, conquering a lot of Europe, and who really did some cruel things, but always with a reason, always with the best interest of his country and people in mind. And that was the character that interested me. And so that's what I drew my Vlad from. Someone from, a very brutal background who definitely had brutal tendencies, but it was never frivolous with him. And it was never for, cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was always in the accomplishment of an objective that was, in his mind, the best for his people. And I just took that and amplified it by saying he was a vampire then with people underneath him that he had made by his own blood. But even still, he's still in modern day Romania, which was Wallachia back then, and still very much involved in his country. That fit for me. So I was glad that readers were able to embrace that view of Vlad. A little different from the Count.
Yeah, well, and it is a fresh point of view that I think, is hard to do because obviously this is a character, a figure that has been written about and
Yeah, a lot.
not just, I mean, and, I'm sure there's graphic novels, it's a cultural, he's a cultural figure,
Yes.
like, as much as Batman or anything.